Most people will hit their biggest goal this year and feel absolutely nothing. Not happy, not relieved, not free, just empty. And that's not a personal failure. That's not you being ungrateful or broken. That's actually what the science predicts will happen. And almost nobody's talking about why. Here's the uncomfortable truth. The way you've been taught to chase success, it's wired backwards. And I don't mean that in some motivational poster kind of way. I mean it literally, psychologically, backwards. So let's get into it. Okay, so the first thing you need to know about, and honestly, I wish someone had told me this years earlier, is something called the arrival fallacy. It was named by a Harvard psychologist named Tal Ben-Shahar, and it basically describes this thing we all do, this belief that sits somewhere deep in our chest that says, when I get there, I'll finally feel it. The peace, the happiness, the exhale. We think the feeling is waiting at the finish line like a prize. But here's what research actually shows. When you hit the goal, yeah, there's a rush. Sometimes it's real and it's electric and it's great, but it's almost always shorter than you expected, way shorter. And then something quieter shows up. And if you didn't build any meaning into the road that got you there, that quiet starts to feel a lot like emptiness. I know what you're thinking. That won't happen to me. My goal is different. And look, I get it. I've thought the exact same thing. But think about the last time you worked hard towards something. A job, a number, a version of your life you've been picturing for months. Remember how it felt the moment you got it? Now remember how it felt 3 weeks later. That gap, that's the arrival fallacy doing its thing. It doesn't mean the goal wasn't worth chasing. It means the feeling you were after, it doesn't live in the outcome. It lives in how you move through the process. So the move isn't to stop wanting things. The move is to ask yourself, what is this goal actually supposed to give me? And then start looking for ways to access that feeling right now in the life you're already living. Okay, here's the one that tends to really land hard. A lot of us, and I mean a lot, aren't actually chasing our own version of success. We're chasing someone else's. Psychology calls them introjected values, which is just a fancy way of saying beliefs you absorbed from your parents, your culture, your school, social media, and slowly started mistaking for your own. Honestly, it's kind of wild when you think about it. We're told what success is supposed to look like before we're even old enough to have a real opinion about it. And then we spend a decade, sometimes two, climbing a ladder, working hard, making sacrifices, only to eventually stop and wonder, is this even my ladder? There's this question I want you to sit with, and I mean actually sit with it, not just nod at it. If no one in your life could ever know what you achieved, would you still want it? If the title, the house, the lifestyle, the income, all of it vanished from any public view, would you still choose it? That question cuts through a lot of noise, and the answer doesn't have to be comfortable, it just has to be honest. Now, this next part sounds counterintuitive at first, but stay with me because this one genuinely changed how I see things. There's a framework in motivational psychology called self-determination theory. It was developed by two researchers, DC and Ryan, and what they found is that human beings have three core psychological needs: autonomy, the feeling that your life is genuinely yours; competence, the sense that you're growing and getting better; and connection, the experience of actually mattering to people. Here's the kicker. Real fulfillment only shows up when all three are being met, not just one, all three. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. Most of what we call success culture, the hustle, the grind, the climb, it almost exclusively feeds competence. Get better, achieve more, prove yourself. But it does that at the cost of autonomy, because suddenly you're living on someone else's schedule, chasing someone else's metrics. And it does it at the cost of connection, because the grind is lonely even when it looks impressive on the outside. This is why someone can be wildly successful by every measurable standard and still feel hollow inside. They're not ungrateful, they haven't lost the plot. They've just been feeding one part of themselves while quietly starving the other two. Competence alone is a well-decorated cage. So here's what to actually do with this. Audit your life across all three of those dimensions. Not just what am I achieving, but where do I feel most free? Where do I feel most genuinely connected to people I care about? Because those answers, that's where success actually lives. All right, I know we've all heard stop comparing yourself to others so many times that it's basically wallpaper at this point. It goes in one ear and right out the other. But the psychology of why we compare is actually really specific, and once you understand the mechanism, it's hard to unsee. A psychologist named Leon Festinger figured out in the 1950s that humans are literally wired to evaluate themselves by looking at other people. It's not a character flaw, it's not insecurity, it's just how our brains orient themselves in the world. The problem isn't the comparing, the problem is the direction. We almost always compare upward, and we almost always compare our messy, doubtful, uncertain interior to someone else's curated highlight reel exterior, our private 3 a.m. anxieties versus their LinkedIn announcement. Crazy, right? And look, every generation has dealt with comparison, but no previous generation has had to deal with it at this scale, at this frequency, on this many screens. So when you scroll through someone's life and feel that pang, that low-grade, why am I so behind feeling, you're not weak, you're just human, in an environment your brain was never designed to handle. Here's the reframe though, and this one's genuinely useful. Instead of comparing yourself to other people, start comparing yourself to who you were 6 months ago, a year ago, 5 years ago. Psychologists call it temporal comparison, and that's a comparison that actually gives you real, usable information. Because honestly, when you look back honestly in that direction, the growth is almost always there, even when it doesn't feel like it, even when the goalposts keep moving. Here's something I don't think gets enough attention. It's not what you're chasing, it's the voice in your head while you're chasing it. Research by Carol Dweck, she's the psychologist behind the whole growth mindset versus fixed mindset thing, shows that the people who get the most genuine satisfaction from their work aren't the ones who achieve the most. They're the ones who've learned to see struggle as part of the process, not a sign that they're failing, just part of the road. Because here's what happens when your inner voice sounds like a harsh judge, when it's only satisfied with perfection, when it dismisses every win with a, yeah, but it's still not enough. No external success will ever feel like success. You'll filter it through that lens and diminish it before you've even had a chance to actually feel it. The work isn't always about achieving more. Sometimes it's about learning to receive what you've already done with just a little more grace. And then there's meaning. This is the big one. Viktor Frankl was a psychiatrist. He survived the Holocaust. And what he came out of that experience saying, what he spent the rest of his life researching, is that the primary human drive isn't pleasure. It's not even success. It's the search for meaning. And study after study backs this up. People who describe their lives as meaningful, regardless of how conventionally successful they are, report higher well-being, more resilience, and a stronger sense of who they are. Meaning without success is like a beautiful frame with no painting in it. It looks great from a distance, but when you get close enough to actually live inside it, something feels off, something feels missing. Meaning, though, meaning can exist even in the hard seasons, even in failure, even in the years that don't look good on paper. Because it's not asking how far have I gotten, it's asking why does this matter? And when you know your real why, not the one you rehearse for interviews, but the one that quietly moves you when nobody's watching, the ghost begins to lose its grip. So let's land here. You're not behind. You're not broken. You're not failing at life because the version of success you imagined hasn't shown up on schedule, or because it did show up and it felt nothing like you thought it would. The relentless chase, the exhausting, quietly lonely grind toward a moving target, that itself is often the thing standing between you and the life you're actually trying to build. The people who feel most genuinely fulfilled aren't the ones who achieved the most. They're the ones who stayed honest about what actually mattered to them, who built real connection into ordinary days, who found meaning in the small stuff, and who learned, slowly, imperfectly, to measure themselves with a little more compassion. That's not settling. That's not giving up on your ambition. That's the quieter, braver, way more sustainable version of it, the kind that doesn't leave you hollow at the finish line. So if you've been chasing a ghost, maybe the most courageous move isn't to run faster. Maybe it's to stop,
Look around at what's already here and ask what's actually worth building on. The answer might genuinely surprise you. If something in this video hit differently, subscribe. Every week we get into the psychology of why we think the way we think, feel the way we feel, and do the things we do. Because understanding yourself, that's not a soft skill. That's everything.